Welcome to the My Gift Podcast with your host, Mark Mitchell.
Hello, and welcome back to episode 7 of My Gift podcast series. This has been an insightful and very fun journey for me the last several weeks, having incredible guests on. I think today will be very special. I've got 2 incredible guests who have a very different journey they've been on. One of them is an Air Force Special Ops, CIA background, special agent in the CIA, the other a Navy SEAL, and together they have co-founded an organization focusing on human rights, very specifically combating human trafficking through technology, through people, and through an organization, a foundation, deliverfund.org. So it's my pleasure today to introduce to you Nic McKinley and Jeremy Mahugh. Welcome to the show, guys.
And thanks a lot for having us, Mark. Appreciate it. Yeah.
No, I'm honored that you're here. I know you're very busy doing a lot of incredible work. Why don't we start off? Nic, maybe just give us a couple of minutes, your background. I know I gave it a little quick intro, but thank you both for your service to our country. But just tell the audience a little bit about who you are.
Well, thank you. And it really, the service was my pleasure. And it's really what drove me to start Deliver Fund. Coming out of Air Force Pararescue, our job is to go rescue people, good people out of bad places, and then getting recruited to the Central Intelligence Agency. The Central Intelligence Agency, the work there was all about, yes, we went after the bad guy, but it was also trying to prevent wars. It was trying to prevent bad things from happening. And in doing that work, I learned about the problem of human trafficking and decided that it was something I had to do something about.
Well, it's an incredible cause. So Jeremy, introduce, please.
My background, I spent 10 years in the Navy as a Navy SEAL. I got, a friend of mine, Marcus Luttrell, I heard him say one time, I should be thanking everybody else for spending their tax dollars to allow me to do what I love to do. I thought it was pretty well said because I really enjoyed the time that I got to do that. I got to be a sniper and just do a lot of really cool stuff that a boy growing up in Montana could only dream about. Obviously, that led to working some other jobs for the government overseas in Iraq, which is where I met Nic. Obviously, Nic at some point told me about what he was working on. And I just said, there has got to be some organization or some government entity that's already addressing this. And so, let's go find them. And I'm sure they've got the ball on it. And what we realized very quickly is it's just not there. There was no national organization or government entity that had the ball on human trafficking. And so, Nic can tell you about, there was no place to even put that intelligence back then. And so, it was something that, it was a really easy push for me to jump in and say, I'll be part of that solution.
Wow.
And here we are. No,
thank you. So McKinley and Mahugh, both from Montana, but
correct.
You actually met in Iraq during your service. Is that correct?
True.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Well, Montana's not that big, right? So surely you, no, I'm kidding. So let's take this to a broader scale because before I started getting to know you and working with you and making some introductions and learning more about your mission, I had my own set of perceptions about what human trafficking was. It's from Mexico, it's Southeast Asia, but I think many of our perceptions are wrong, right? So talk about just broadly, where is human trafficking right here in Dallas? Talk about it for a minute. Educate us, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. I commonly get that feedback, which is really a myth because we know that human trafficking happens around the world, but we always see it in the movies or there's a lot of organizations who are fighting things in places like Cambodia or Thailand. And so we just kind of think that that's where it's happening. And there's a market that the statistics are staggering. The market really used to look like it was something that was happening in the red light district on a street corner in the seedy part of town. And we just called that prostitution. Was there force, fraud, or coercion involved? Lots of times, most likely. However, we just looked at it as like prostitution. We arrested those sometimes victims, but prostitutes, charged them with narcotics and prostitution and sometimes turned them back to the street. Well, over really probably the last 10 years, we've seen this really big spike in essentially that market, but it's because of online exploitation. So companies like Backpage.com, you've been in our office, that was the previous office of Backpage.com. They were the largest purveyor of these sex advertising marketplace ads. And so that allowed the market in just a 5-year period to jump 846% because you could buy and sell from your iPhone that's in your pocket. And so that really ended up being a starting place for us to jump in and say, we can identify where it's happening, and we can take that amount that's just gone so exponentially up so fast, we can start to curb that market very quickly. And that's important. So, what's happening on the street, law enforcement can see, but what's happening on the internet, oftentimes they can't. So.
No, I think that's fascinating. Thank you for sharing that, because I have been in your offices, and to understand that this Backpage right here in Dallas was one of the centers of making it easy to do human trafficking, right? From your iPhone. That's a little bit scary. Nic, before I met Jeremy and got involved a little bit, most of the organizations, or all the organizations I was familiar with, were really on the back end. Like someone had been victimized, and they're there to care for them and take them forward. But your mission of deliverfund.org is very different. Could you just expand a little bit about what is the mission of deliverfund.org?
Our mission is to end human trafficking in our lifetime. And we're going to do that by attacking the common denominator in the equation of human trafficking, which is the human trafficker. You cannot have a human trafficking victim to restore if you do not have a human trafficker. So that's where we're focusing our resources of time, treasure, and talent to take that human trafficker out of the equation so that we don't make any more new victims. So it's not only the ultimate form of prevention, but it also helps with the restoration process, because now these victims don't have to constantly be looking over their shoulder, wondering whether or not that trafficker that they escaped from or that they were rescued from is around the next corner.
So with an organization made up of Special Ops, Navy SEAL, CIA, NSA, what is the foundation of your approach? Like, how are you going about, I think there's a technology component to this, right? At the core of what you're doing?
Absolutely.
So bring that to life for us. How are you using this technology to actually find and stop that trafficker?
Oftentimes when people hear that, Jeremy's a Navy SEAL sniper and I was a pararescueman and, experience at the CIA within kinetic units, that must mean that we're kicking doors and doing rogue vigilante stuff, which is not the case at all, right? We're cyber warriors these days. The weapon of choice is a computer and is a keyboard. And when we look at the counterterrorism fight, people are familiar with the raid on al-Baghdadi, the raid on bin Laden. They're familiar with those pieces. We make movies about those pieces because it's fun to watch. What's not fun to watch is the 90% that goes behind that in the intelligence collection over periods of years and the analysis that puts everything together to tell those door kickers what door to kick. Well, here in the United States, Jeremy and I know as much about kicking doors as anybody alive, but we're not law enforcement. We can't go do that. That's law enforcement's job. And so they're the ones that need the support of that intelligence. And where does the intelligence come from? It's all out there. It's on the internet. You just have to know how to, 1, collect it, 2, analyze it, and then 3, disseminate it into a way that actually makes sense to law enforcement, where they can then go take action and do what it is that our tax dollars pay them to go do.
No, that makes perfect sense. In fact, it's funny you mentioned the door kicking and bin Laden. I had the privilege recently to meet Rob O'Neill, Navy SEAL. So many of us think about the stories and how cool those stories are, but this is a very different approach, right? It's very subtle. And I heard you mention law enforcement. How are you partnering, training, educating, or partnering with law enforcement who actually does have the authority to make the arrest and to do the kind of things to stop the human trafficker? How are you doing that, Jeremy?
It's right in those same offices that we occupy now, the previous place where they were selling minors or complicit in selling minors for sex online. Those same office spaces now are utilized to equip, train, advise law enforcement. So not only do we bring a platform in which they can all communicate and collaborate on, whether it's local, state, federal, all these different jurisdictions are always very siloed. We've got technology platforms that they can all work on, build cases, input data specific to human trafficking, and that becomes a very robust net that gets cast across the country. So now if an officer is building a case in Santa Barbara, California, it can ping on something that's associated with another case in Dallas, Texas. And so now that officer knows who to call, who to talk to. The computer basically helps tie that net and all those pieces together. So that's a really, really big game changer in the human trafficking fight. There's lots of other technologies that we're working on and all come together in that fight, because as Nick often says, there's no push button here, catch human trafficker. Not yet, but that's kind of what we're working towards at Deliver Fund. And so, there's a lot of different things that law enforcement need to be educated on, that they're one out there, two trained on, and then ultimately we bring a methodology very similar to what we did in the counterterrorism fight, a very target-centric methodology approach.
No, that's fascinating for people like me, just knowing that these technologies, CIA, NSA, but having the expertise of your team now, bringing that to life in the private sector, so to speak, but for what you're doing is amazing. I want to go back to something though, Jeremy, because I heard you on a radio show recently. I think you're in Houston as a guest. And I think for people, again, I want to make this real for people, right? It's right here.
Right.
I think you told a story about a gated community in a state in Houston or something.
Yeah.
Bring that to life for our viewers.
I believe it was in Katy, Texas. So just to the west of Houston.
Yep.
And, we do a lot of work with the Human Trafficking Task Force there. And one of the cases that they had was, I believe it was an oil executive who was traveling abroad for a couple of years. And so they were renting out their house. And they don't know who's renting it, right? It was being used as a brothel in a gated community.
In Katy, Texas.
In Katy, Texas.
Fairly affluent area. It's not the seedy red light part of town.
Right. And even there was nice cars. There's Mercedes being parked in there, just a high turnover of different cars. But, they got the gate code. They were coming in that. And so it was kind of funny actually at the end of the story, because they brought in a whole SWAT team through this gated community, and one of the traffickers tried to run upstairs and was trying to hide in the attic. And it was like, when you come in that entryway, it was such a nice house. There was a big vaulted ceiling there, right? And the guy he fell through the ceiling and was dangling. And I think all the cops were hoping that he would just fall on the tile floor. But the reality of that is, and one of your previous questions was like, who are these victims, right? What we're seeing, and especially working with Houston, 85% to 95% are American citizens being sold by American citizens to American citizens.
Oh my.
And the average age of kids that come into this is like 14 years old. So these are our children who are sometimes being groomed, sometimes being more and more now abducted. There is it's not, like I said, it's just not something that's just happening overseas, like dollar for dollar. Nick can talk to this, but dollar for dollar, we have a larger problem here in the United States. And it's just something that we've only seen as the very tip of the iceberg as far as what law enforcement's uncovered. And partly because, again, it's happening in this technology sphere where they're observing what's happening on the street, but not necessarily have the tools to be able to look again on the internet and see where it's actually being sold. So,
as a father to two daughters, that scares me. Nick, I jump in there. I think you're going to say something.
It's a scale issue. So if you go to most of your police departments, you say, "Where's your drug task force?" You say, "Oh, we got a HIDA," and they'll tell you how great it is and how well funded it is and how impactful it is. Do you have law enforcement officers in the Joint Terrorism Task Force locally? Absolutely. This is a capability we have there. What's your human trafficking task force look like? And that's usually what you get is silence, or, well, we have a detective somewhere, what's her name, who deals with some of those issues, but they also deal with 5, 10, 15 other things. Yep. So for law enforcement, it's a scale issue. A law enforcement officer only has so much time. They're overworked and underpaid as it is anyway. They don't have a lot of resources because there's no major federal mandates. There is now, and those are just starting to come to light, but there hasn't been 30 years of major federal mandates requiring a robust counter-human trafficking capability within every local county sheriff's office. So they're doing the best that they can. But when you ask a human trafficking investigator to do a human trafficking case, think about just the social media and analytics on that alone. Imagine if you take, my wife uses social media a lot. I'm not really on it, but she's on it a lot. And I know Jeremy's wife is on it a lot too. So you know what it would take to manually go through all of my wife's friends on Facebook, on one platform, and all of Jeremy's wife's friends and try to find common connections?
It's immense.
That's a day.
Yeah.
At least.
Yeah, it's an immense task.
Our technology makes that the click of a button. Literally, it'll happen within mere seconds. What we just did was made it so that human trafficking investigator, just on the social media analysis piece, can close that case an entire day faster. Wow. So that's ultimately the job that we're trying to do. We're trying to make it so that law enforcement officers can close human trafficking cases, start and close human trafficking cases better, faster, and cheaper.
So I love that segue there too. So thank you, because as much as you have done with technology and you're partnering with law enforcement, you can't do this on your own.
No.
There has to be a certain set of business partnerships. I think we've talked about banks before, Jeremy, a little bit. We've talked about airlines. Yeah. Like, who are the types of businesses that you can align with and partner with to actually be the most effective in finding those traffickers, right? So tell that story a little bit for us.
Go ahead.
So financial institutions, number one.
Okay.
Transportation industry and everything that goes around that, number two. And then commercial real estate, and specifically hospitality within commercial real estate, hotels, motels, and then apartment complexes is the third one. If we can get those three industries to take the human trafficking fight very seriously, proactively find human traffickers within their ecosystem, we could eliminate this human trafficking problem. And our math and the math models that we've done around our impact show that when we can reach a proper level of funding, we can take an 80% reduction to the human trafficking market, the commercial sex human trafficking market, within a 5-year period.
Wow. So you gave a pretty good list of businesses there, but I'd love to know a bit more about, so what is it about banking or financial institutions that partnership brings to life? And also the airline, given my career at American Airlines, what is about the airline connection that can really bring this to life to go find the bad guys?
So human trafficking is highly transitory. And cash, I mean, I don't have any cash on me right now. Jeremy probably doesn't have any cash on him right now.
Because we work for a nonprofit.
That's valid.
Well, I was going to offer to buy you lunch. Yeah. Maybe I guess I know who's paying now for going to lunch. So. All right, go ahead.
But nobody carries cash anymore. But human trafficking is a predominantly cash business. So if you're a human trafficker, and human trafficking is also highly transitory. So if you're a human trafficker and you've got a trunk full of cash, that's going to raise some eyebrows. So you've got to do something with that cash. And so you put it into the same system as everybody else. Most hotels are not taking cash. I mean, a lot of businesses just won't take cash anymore. So they're forced to put their proceeds into a bank. Well, that creates a problem for a bank because those are illicit proceeds. So if I'm a human trafficker and you own a bank and I put my money in your bank, you're liable for that. And under anti-money laundering laws. Now you have an anti-money laundering division that's trying to get to the bottom of that, but the numbers are not big enough on the money that I'm putting into your bank to really trigger any of the financial software. That's where we can come in, because we can actually help them using just their subscriber data. We don't even need to know the identities of the people, but just using the subscriber data or their customer data, help them figure out which of their customers are connected to human trafficking and which ones aren't. And with one of our banking clients, that looked like that was 20 human trafficking investigations that were opened up by the DOJ through FinCEN in 1 year, just in 1 year. So and that's pretty cool, because human trafficking human trafficking is a hard case to prosecute. It requires victims to testify, lots of different things. Money laundering, that's just math. You either did or you did not.
No, that's fascinating, because if I hear you right, you've got a wealth of data, and you now have a chance to marry that with the subscriber data, look for patterns and transactions that then say, based on this pattern and this other data that we have, you then go find potential sources, right, to go open the cases and do the investigations.
Absolutely, and there's a process for that, right? I mean, banks, there is a process that's mandated by the federal government. Transportation, same thing. Hotels is a little trickier. But most of these human traffickers, while there are the apartment brothels and the house brothels, those do happen, not at the same scale that the human trafficker just running his operation out of a hotel for 2 or 3 days does. And so we look at fighting these problems not at how can we rescue one victim. We look at it as how can we rescue all the victims.
All of them.
So we look at this as scaling a capability just like any other business would look at it.
Very much also, one of the things that we're trying to do is disrupt. We want to disrupt their business and ultimately raise the risk, because every business person you talk to is always trying to mitigate risk in their business. But at the end of the day, for human traffickers, this is just a business. Unlike terrorism, who maybe have an ideological reason for why they're doing this, human trafficking is just because of money. So, and to the point of like, these traffickers are making sometimes $100,000 to $200,000 per victim that they're running 3 to 5 victims. When you're talking $500,000 a year tax-free, very lucrative, low risk. So as soon as we start to insert risk into that market, they're going to start finding something else to do and or just be caught.
People often talk about legalizing drugs will manage the drug market, right? Legalizing prostitution will stop this, but I'm not sure that's true.
It's not true.
It's not true. And
I'll let our data guy really respond to that.
Expand on that for me, Nick. Yeah,
the data confirms that every country that has legalized prostitution has seen an increase in human trafficking. So, I mean, it's linear. That the best way to increase your human trafficking problem is to legalize prostitution.
It creates that like storefront that is legitimate, that you can run that illicit business behind, and it just makes it that much harder for law enforcement.
Germany was the last one to do it. They legalized prostitution just a few years ago, and their parliament is already talking about reversing that law because it has caused such an influx of human trafficking victims into Germany, and then that creates a illicit market tourism.
Oh my God.
Is what happens, right? It's like people from Texas going to California to smoke marijuana recreationally. That's tourism essentially based around an industry. That's what happens when you legalize prostitution.
No, I think that gets at the perceptions again, right? We have perceptions that it's somewhere else. It's Southeast Asia. It's right here. The perception is if we just legalize it, it'll stop it. But the facts and the data says it's the opposite. It actually gets worse and therefore harder for law enforcement to actually do it because there's some legal entities that can cover it up, right? Is that what I'm hearing?
Absolutely. Now they have to go in. I mean, right now, if you have a human trafficker who says, "Oh no, the money that I was putting in that bank was based on prostitution." Okay, well, prostitution's illegal too. Thank you for admitting to to criminal money laundering.
Check that
right?
box also.
So now what you're allowing those human traffickers to do is have legitimate businesses that they're then pushing that money through, which then gives them the same rights as any other business owner. So now you just made it insanely difficult for law enforcement to get to the bottom of what that business is actually doing.
I think there's another point on that too that's very interesting, because this was a myth for me, over the years, thinking that like prostitution is the oldest profession, right? And that, like a lot of these women are doing it because they want to. And just this morning, we were talking with a lady from the governor's office here in Texas, and they've run a study around the Houston area, and they were saying that the girls who are in quote unquote prostitution that are 18 to 24 years old, so they're not minors, 18, 20, so the law is probably just going to look at them as prostitutes, very hard to prove otherwise. As they're starting to do the research behind that, would you say 75% of them are actually being trafficked?
Mm-hmm.
But even a bigger point is like they didn't just wake up one day and decide that they were going to do that. It's probably started when they were much younger. I mean, a lot of our cases we see something started when they were probably around that average age I mentioned before, 12, 13, 14 years old. You have daughters, like what a vulnerable age that is, and how you can craft somebody's whole life. And if you have somebody who's just going to be a bully and a dominant figure, very soon that person is not only that, but like we have victims who have said they've been sold for sex while underage, so it's rape, 6 to 20 times a day.
Oh, wow.
So if you can imagine a young child who endures something like that, by the time that she's 22, 25, we're looking at her as like, well, you're a prostitute. You're doing this because you want to. She may not know any other way to survive, right? So I mean, it's a really sad scenario that I don't think people realize. These women who are running a business, making it look like they want to be doing that, and they're selling themselves, they're selling sex, they're making it look lucrative, and all those things. There's a history there that got them to that point.
Now, if I think back to the reception I attended recently at your Dallas headquarters, and when I was listening to you and your wife, Brittany, who's very much involved in this as well, talk about the 13, the 14-year-old, the 15-year-old victim, the traffickers are creating a dependency, right? They're, whether
Absolutely.
it's through drugs or through money or through care. So when they get to the 18 or 20 or 20, they just can't walk away, right?
They can't walk away. They don't need a cage to keep them enslaved. They've got all kinds of other levers to pull, emotional hooks. They are the source of everything for that
Narcotics.
person. So
Yeah. The dependency is real, right? Just like it's a drug addict that can't get off of on their own, right?
Yep.
They can't
Absolutely.
leave on their own without some help.
We find we've had victims with cases that we've been involved with tell us, they're heroin addicts. This one victim I'm thinking of in particular was a heroin addict, but she didn't know how to shoot herself up because her trafficker would come in and shoot her up. And when she got out of line, her trafficker would just withhold the heroin until she got so sick that she would do anything to get the heroin, and that cycle just continued to perpetuate itself. And then there's also the issue of if the trafficker needs to get rid of her, then he just ODs her on heroin. The cops show up, they're like, oh, just another dead heroin prostitute, case closed. And so then they don't get any. Nobody's looking at this as a homicide. And so it's one of the other issues we have to look at is the way that human trafficking feeds societal decay. I mean, just our society is just it looks great and it's shiny on the outside, but that underlayer is just decaying at an ever increasing rate. And the availability of commercial sex opportunities is part of what is increasing that decay. And the fact that there is such a large market is what attracts those human traffickers to go put these girls out there to go meet what is a market demand, which in turn feeds that societal decay.
Wow. Ending human trafficking in our lifetime. There's nothing small about your mission. There's nothing. I mean, if someone's listening today and doesn't want to buy into that, then there's something wrong. But it's an amazing mission. You're 3, 4, maybe 5 years old as an organization. Is that about right?
5
And
years.
you've got an aggressive growth plan.
Yes.
Let's talk about where is deliverfund.org trying to go from an organization. You've got a Dallas headquarters. You've got a regional office in Albuquerque, I believe. Where are you trying to go in the next 2 or 3 years? What does that forward plan look like to really achieve that objective that I love? Where are you trying to go?
So right now, our big focus is we're building out our International Human Trafficking Analysis Center, the ITAC.
Okay.
And what the ITAC is the centralized brain for all things human trafficking in the United States. That doesn't currently exist. It does in a virtual state. We have those analysts distributed throughout the United States that are currently fielding incoming leads from law enforcement and helping them out. We're going to take that, what is currently a virtual capability, we're going to consolidate it into a physical capability here in Dallas, Texas. So that's our current initiative for this year. And what that will do is it will allow law enforcement officers from the farthest reaches of the country. I mean, we're working with law enforcement in Alaska now. And Hawaii just called us. I mean, it'll allow them all to have one common operating picture. So as that human trafficker moves from Miami to Tallahassee through Alabama and into Texas, we'll be able to track them all along that route, and eventually their sins are going to catch up to them. And that's where we're going for 2020.
So that's the technology component of this international data center. How about the organization, Jeremy? Because I know you're trying to grow the scale of the organization as well, to have more people on the ground to use the technology and partner with businesses. Tell us about that.
Right now, we're running 40 or 50 students through law enforcement from all those different jurisdictions again, and we want to get that ramped up so that we're teaching more people how to fish, right? Yep. And doing that at scale. The other thing, I think, as of this morning, we were talking, I think we're in 65 or 70 law enforcement and agencies, departments and agencies. But we want to have that across the entire country. We want it to be accessible for every law enforcement agency that has a mandate to fight human trafficking. Here in Texas, that even includes like the TABC. That includes every different. There's a bunch of different jurisdictions, right? You have DPS, you have sheriffs, you have local police, and so just making sure that anybody who's fighting human trafficking has this resource to tie into, like Nick was talking about, our analysis center, that becomes that centralized brain for all things human trafficking, and really that just casts that net across the whole country, and then we go beyond, right? I mean, we want to focus on our own backyard first, but we can take this same methodology, the same process, and make it a global fight.
You are a 501c3. You're a not-for-profit organization.
Correct.
How do you raise the funds? If someone's watching today and wants to go try to make a difference or learn more, how do they do that? How can they help you? How can we help you?
Deliverfund.org is our website. We've got good information there. We also have a place on there where you can sign up for a quarterly newsletter. Actually, I think it's a monthly email, and then quarterly we might send it out to your house if you sign up. So we try and keep people informed of what we're doing, but also we have some information for parents on there, how they can keep their kids safe from some of these different technology hazards and risks. And so that's really helpful. There's lots you can do to learn on the internet. There's a lot of information out there. Just put it on a Google alert. You'll start seeing all the articles that are written and all the arrests that are being made and the good things that are going on as well. But ultimately, people need to get informed. And then if you want to help us, we believe that we have the best prevention model in existence, because if you get rid of the human trafficker, you cannot have a human trafficking victim. And so that's really, really important. Nick mentioned having that 80% reduction in just a short amount of time, like 5 years. And we very much believe that. We know that it's capable. The data is so important, and people can go online and see what we do, keep track of what we're doing, and they can donate both on the website as well as you can find us on all the other social media as well.
And Mark, when it comes to nonprofits and it comes to charities, nobody likes to talk about money, right? The only time people like to talk about money is if it's an investment. So if I told you that I got a winning investment that's got a great return,
Sign me up.
Yeah, you'd be like, hey, we introduce me to the guy. Well, when it comes to investing in the counter human trafficking capability in this country, like this is where the good investment is. And when you imagine one of your daughters goes missing, ends up in a human trafficking situation, you would go out and hire the absolute best you could possibly find, former Navy SEALs, former CIA, former FBI, former NSA, to go do whatever needed to be done to get her back. Well, let's do that at scale for all the parents across the country. And so that's why we need people to invest in what it is that we're doing at DeliverFund, so we can give them that return of safety for their children and safety for our society.
Yeah. Return on investment for money is nice. Return on investment for human life it's probably the highest moral standard we should have, right?
Absolutely.
It's sacred. As we start to wrap up here today, what would you share with our viewers today that maybe we haven't talked about already? Nick, can I start with you?
If you're a parent, be involved in your children's lives. Know who they're talking to. Know what social media platforms they're on. Know what it is that they're concerned about, and just be a good parent. The number one thing that every human trafficking victim that we have, almost, there are obviously exceptions, but almost every human trafficking victim had a parent who at one point or another checked out, and that is what led to them ending up in that human trafficking cycle. And in one case, even the father was a IT security specialist. He was the guy who knew what was going on, had all the passwords, had everything going on with his kid's technology, and a trafficker still, over a period of about a year, groomed his son, and his son ended up being abducted into a human trafficking cell. So knowing what they're doing and then educating your children about the fact that human trafficking is a very real problem. You'll talk to them about drugs. It's time for us to start talking to them about human trafficking.
I love the way you said that. Thank you. Jeremy, anything to add to that?
Along the similar lines, I've got another friend here in Dallas who his daughter's in high school, and he decided to take her apps on her phone and have every incoming message also hit his phone. So he's seeing what people are sending her. You'd be amazed. I mean, just amazed with the just vulgar stuff that's out there, but also like the grown men, 40, 50 years old who are like trying to get in to a high school girl like that. Like they're actively pursuing. So we're not here to like breed mass hysteria and mass paranoia, but you've got to be smart. And if you're a parent, you need to know what that communication looks like and just be aware. I mean, that's the biggest thing, I think.
No, I think those are two great summaries. So, no, thank you. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for being on the show today.
Yeah.
But more importantly, I think, thank you for what you're about to do over our lifetime, putting an ending to human trafficking in our lifetime. I hope that today that you are compelled to do something, compelled to act. If you're not, watch this one more time. Spend 30 more minutes and watch this again. There is such an opportunity. There are such misperceptions. And I hope today has brought light to an organization doing incredibly good things around human rights with the mission, I'll say it again, to end human trafficking in our lifetime. Each of you watching today has a gift. It's clear to me that both Nick and Jeremy have amazing gifts that they've now dedicated and devoted sharing back with the world right here in Dallas and Albuquerque and across the country. Each of you too has a gift. And I challenge you to go find that gift and share it with the world. Thanks for joining us today. That's a wrap for episode 7. We'll see you again next week. Thank you.